Hello everyone, welcome to the latest editing tutorial in which we are going to be talking about masks. Hence this thing, which is a balaclava, I hear you say. Yes, because I only have balaclavas in the house. Why do I have balaclavas in the house? None of your damn business. So we're going to be looking at masks in Adobe Premiere Pro. I'm going to be using version 2019 on Windows 10, but don't worry, it's basically the same across the board and on Macs as well. So we're going to be looking at how to create masks, how to utilize them in different ways within our editing timelines. So let's jump straight into it. Okay, so I'm using the editing workspace, which you can find in your window workspaces, and click there if you want to follow along exactly so you can see the same layout as I have on the screen here. Obviously ignore this very handsome man at the moment, we'll get to that. But first I just want to show you the basics of creating the mask and kind of the bog standard things that you can do with it before we go into applying it to actual footage. But we will get to that later in the video, don't worry. A lot of people are kind of put off by masks because they think they sort of associate it with like motion graphics and After Effects, and some people are just, familiar with Premiere Pro. Much like I was, and I was kind of intimidated by the word masks back in the day, but they really are a lot simpler than you think. So hopefully this video will help sort of show you how easy it is to use them and use them in a productive and creative way. So if we go ahead and we'll just create a color map for now, and we'll just make it a reddish sort of color. We'll call it red mask, and then we'll just go ahead and create a new sequence from clip. Okay, so we have our red shape here. If you select the file that you want to add the mask to, we can go over here to Effects Controls, and then you'll notice under Opacity, you've got these three symbols here. So basically, this means you can create, as it says, an ellipse mask, you can create a 4-point polygon mask, which is just a rectangle, and you can create a free draw bezier? I don't know, whatever. I tend to use this one because most of the shapes that I need to create aren't, squares or circles, but there are different options there if you just want to quickly create a circle, like so, or vice versa if you just go undo and click that. You can edit these as well, obviously. You can use these little pointers here to transform the shape just however you please. And it's basically what it's done is it's created a kind of a cutout of a section of what we had originally. If I delete the mask now, just by going over to the mask here, I can press backspace. That will basically remove the mask and we've got the whole shape back. So if I use the pen tool, I'll just quickly show you how that works. So you can just click and sort of create your own shape. So say we're going to create this wonderful shape here. Once you join them back together, the mask will be formed. You'll see that now if I join these. So that creates your mask. And then if you wanted, say, to have the outside of this shape rather than the inside of the shape be visible, you can just click on this inverted checkbox here. You can just check that. So now it's basically cut out the shape that you have, you've drawn. Obviously it depends on what you're trying to do, whether or not you want that inverted or not. Another cool little feature is the mask feather, which basically means how hard the edge is going to be around the edge of your mask there. So if I show you an example now, if I up this, at the moment it's at 10 by default, if I up this all the way, it can go a long way. You can see there that it's feathering the edges very heavily, so it's just kind of adding a kind of faded, blurry effect, which can help make your masks stand out less. I'll show you kind of more about that later. And obviously if you want it to be a very solid mask, you just take it straight down to 0 and there's no bleed at all. It's just a perfect cutout of the shape that you've created. Obviously you can also change the opacity here of the mask itself. You've got the master opacity there still. To be honest, I never tend to use that much. The master opacity seems to do just fine for me if I do need it. Another thing you can do is you can copy masks and place them on other objects. So if I was to, let's just duplicate the red mask here, and we'll change the color to a brighter red if you like. Say okay. We'll bring that into our timeline and pop that on top. And then you can literally just go over to opacity, you just right click, and say paste. You pasted that same shape onto the mask, and then if I went onto the red mask that was beneath it, I could just resize that. And then you can start getting a bit creative with different patterns and colors, that kind of thing. Obviously we want to do more than that. We want to work with actual video. We don't want to just work with color mats. But I just want to give you an example of how you can transfer the shapes that you've created to other files as well, and then transform them to get a bit creative with whatever it is you're doing. If I just delete the second mask here, we'll just work with this one red mask for now. Another thing you can do is you can edit the shape and size of the mask as you go along. This will require a bit of basic knowledge about keyframing. I will do a keyframing tutorial at a later time, I'm sure, so if you don't know too much about that, stay tuned, but I'll just assume at this point that you have a basic understanding of what keyframing is. So if we go to our first frame, we'll toggle this on. There are various things you can do with these buttons here, but I'm just going to basically go through the basics right now. Now I've clicked toggle animation. We've obviously set our first keyframe point there, so that's basically going to hold these values. The shape of the mask is going to hold this sort of value here. Now if I move 2 to 3 seconds in, let's go there, and I tweak these shapes, you'll notice another keyframes form there, and that basically means that between these 2 points over here, it's going to transform from that original shape to this shape here, which you'll see if I just play it through, like so. Now, transforming a mask like that can be very useful. Let's say you're trying to cover something in a frame and the image that you're using, maybe the shot isn't on a tripod and it's moving, and you need the mask to change shape so that it doesn't overlap over something else that's in frame. This is a good way to do that without having to create like a brand new mask and fading between different size masks. You can literally just alter the size and shape of it using the mask path and using keyframing here. So that's always a good thing to know as well. There's a lot more experimentation you could do with that, especially when you start tracking. But we'll worry about that for another video. We're just looking at the basics right now. Okay, so now let's show you guys a kind of more practical example rather than just working with the color mats here. So if we go over to our other sequence that I have ready here from my last editing tutorial, you'll recognize this geezer. As you can see, I've kind of turned off a few things in the timeline just so I can go through it all with you now and show you what I've done. You may notice that it's not graded and there's this disgusting microphone setup that I've got here. Yes, that's gaffer tape and a chair holding my microphone up. I do not have a boom stand. I am a poor person. I spent all my money on alcohol, but don't do that. Anyway, so we're going to look now at how we can apply the masks practically within this situation, because as you may know from watching the beginning of this video, you can't see these parts here on my intro, and you can't see the microphone in my videos either. Now I've used masks to achieve that. So what I've got here, I've got Lux. Lux is, I think it's part of the Red Giant Magic Bullet suite. Basically just a fancy way of color grading. So these are some effects that I've applied to my video here. If we go on down, so I've got one effect here which I've turned off. I'm going to turn that back on now. You'll see that basically is just a grade. It's basically made things a bit more saturated, make things a bit more contrasty, makes it look a little bit nicer than the flat image that the camera provides. But I'm still getting these kind of creases from the white backdrop that I use in my little setup, if you can call it that. So what I want to do is I want to get rid of this white. So what I kind of want to do is I want to up the exposure of these white sections, but if I do that over the whole image, I'm going to up the exposure of myself too, and I quite like how exposed I am currently. I think I'm lit the way that I want to be lit. So you'll see up here I've got another Lux effect that I've applied to the clip. If I just turn that on, you'll see those kind of edges there go away. It's not gone away there because I haven't tweaked those yet, but you'll see I've got a mask on this Lux thing here. So basically what you can do, rather than just playing with the opacity of something like we did with the red mask here, obviously we were doing the mask under the opacity tab in the effects controls, you can also apply it to effects. So you can apply it to color grades, you can apply it to whatever it is that you're putting in your timeline that has a kind of a visual element to it. You can create a mask for it. So here obviously I've created a mask for where I want to overexpose the background, if you like. So if I just click on here, I'll show you where my mask is. You can see it's a bit of a janky mess. But that's basically because all the space up here was already exposed correctly, and the area down here, sometimes my arm would lift and you'd see underneath my arm, which would then show the backdrop here where I didn't want it to. But what I've done is use a mask feather at 72 so that the overexposure on my arm here isn't so intense, it's feathered. You can see here by this sort of dotted line how far kind of the feather reaches. If I was to turn that to 0, you can see there, you can see there's a little kind of effect. Like if I feather it all the way, you can see my head gets a little bit overexposed. And if I was to remove the mask entirely, like so, you can see what happens if I don't use a mask at all. So Having drawn that mask using the what I call the pen tool, the free draw bezier, if you want to be posh, I've basically just created a rough shape around myself to avoid myself from getting overexposed by this effect, but overexposing these sections that I want to appear white. The other point that I want to make is about this microphone here. Obviously the microphone doesn't normally appear in the videos either. You can see here I've got a white color matte that I've added to the timeline, which is currently invisible. I'll just toggle that on, and you can see the microphone magically vanishes. And again, that's done with the same effect basically that we used for the red mask. I went into the opacity, I applied a mask, and I just put a white mask on top of the image here, and then I used a feather so that the edge of the mask isn't so obvious and blends in better with the rest of the whites. So if I was to remove that mask again, so we'll just backspace, you can see that the whole image is white because it's just one big white color matte applied on top of my image. So that's why I've gone in and I've drawn this shape around the microphone, added a little feather to blend it a bit nicer, and there you go. You can't tell that the mic was ever there, except I've now shown you all my tricks. So now you probably won't be able to unsee it. My janky, terrible setup. So yeah, that's basically how you use masks. I'll show you quickly, I guess just from scratch. Let's just quickly go into this mask here for the looks. I'll delete that now. And we'll hide the white for a second. So all you would do is I would have applied this effect using the old effects panel down here. I'd have dragged it into my file, and then I would just click on the pen. So then I just start drawing a rough shape kind of around myself where I don't want to overexpose the image, if you like. And then we just go around the outside like so. And you can see there it's starting to take effect, but you can see there's signs of the backdrop looking a bit off there, and obviously I've not gone to the edges of the screen here. So I can edit this now that I've created it. I can literally just go in, I can start dragging the points here off of the image itself so that it goes outside of the frame. That just ensures that I haven't missed any points. So that goes right out there. I can bring these in a bit closer, and then just for a bit of safety, because obviously I'm going to start moving around at some point, I'll just add a feather like so to just make sure that it doesn't look obvious that there's just a big sort of overexposed line around me. But you can see there, as I've feathered it, the background sort of started to bleed through a bit. You can see that the backdrop crease there is just appearing. You might be able to just see that. So I'm just going to drag the keyframes in a bit further, because I don't mind if it goes over my clothes slightly, because you can't really tell once you've feathered it. It's just like just a bit of light hitting the edge of my arm there maybe. And then the same here. If let's do the white mask here. So if I delete that. Now, obviously, I can't see the microphone. I don't know where my mask needs to be. So a little trick, if you want, is to just lower the opacity of whatever it is that you're masking, if that's an option for you. Click on this all. So now I can see the mic. I know where I need to draw around. So I'll just quickly make a little mask. You can't click really outside of the frame, so you kind of have to click within it and then drag it out after the fact, but it's not too big of a deal. So there you go. We'll bring the opacity back up to 100%. Now I'll click off, and you can't tell there that there's really a mask in place, but I like to feather it as much as I can. Obviously, if I feather it too much, you can see the microphone starts to reappear. So I just want to feather it a little bit, and then obviously the microphone is still there, so I can just drag it out a little wider. Obviously, if I was to lean across here, I would get covered slightly by that, so that's where the feather comes in handy, with just kind of softening that edge so it's not so obvious that I've gone behind a mask. And I mean, if I was to go directly behind it at one point, I might use the mask path tool that I described earlier to just alter this keyframe here, bring it back for just a quick second and then back as my head moves back into position. That might be something that I'll do in the future, or might need to do in the future. So hopefully you get the general idea with that. I'm just going to quickly now show you another project where I've used this in a different way. So here we've got a little shot from a music video that I worked on not too long ago. Go check it out. Clear My Head, Ralph DeLufa, very good. Obviously what we've got here is a shot of a mirror. We shot basically two takes from the same angle, didn't move the camera. One where he was acting in a certain way over here, and one where he was acting in another way for his reflection. So it looks like his reflection is staring at him even though he's not actually looking into the mirror. So the way that we've done this kind of split screen here is by using a mask. So we've got if I just hide the image on top right now. So obviously this is the original bit of footage here, so you can see him actually looking at himself, and then I've applied this other take over the top where he's not looking at himself. And that was done using the opacity for this clip here and adding a mask. You can see the masks here. I've added some feather, but basically it's just put just this section here of this shot into the frame and left this shot underneath here. So when you play them together, it obviously looks like he is just looking at himself. But yeah, that's a very basic way to use the split screen, and another way that you can use masks in a creative manner. But yeah, thank you very much for watching this tutorial. I hope that's introduced you to the basics of masking and will help you to get a bit more creative with some of your projects, make you think about the different ways you can apply different visual effects, apply different shapes, work with different images on top of one another. It's a good thing to play around with when you've got multiple layers of media stacked up, if you want certain things to maybe look a bit fancier or maybe hide some of your mistakes. It's another very good tool for hiding mistakes, I can tell you that much. So yeah, have a play around with it, and I'm sure we will revisit this sometime in the future. So keep an eye out for the next one, and I'll see you again next time. It's hot.